Tonight is about developing scenarios and continuing developing scenarios that can occur in the school division. Norfolk Public Schools is a long, proud, rich tradition of schools. The idea is to continue moving that proud and rich tradition forward, but with the challenges that face today's school divisions out there, whether it comes to poverty or whether it comes to diversity, whether it comes to balance or the age of building or the condition of your facilities, is all a big, complicated puzzle that has to fit together and has to be the right solution moving forward. And the right solution doesn't always appear right in front of you, because what may seem like a good decision at this one building may be a domino impact going down the road. And so, well, we came to meet with you in October. Believe it or not, it was October we came and met with you on the first community dialogue, and we asked you about giving us some planning rules. You know, how do we plan this division moving forward? It occurred to us when we walked into some options work session that there were some things that really, from an objective point of view, really from the outside looking in, saying, okay, this decision has some limitations to it because of the next, and the next step to it. And so it could be things like, okay, if you do this, we may have a possibility of displacing neighborhood kids because we don't have enough seats in the boundary to make sure we handle all neighborhood kids. And how do we make a division of choice, of diversity, and still have neighborhood concepts and keeping kids near their buildings? And how do we do that best? And so we stepped back for a minute because we had to. And quite frankly, I asked some really hard questions. And questions that, you know, probably to a less receptive Board of Education and to a less receptive strong leadership would have seemed like more challenges. But they weren't. They were challenges to them in the sense that if we don't ask these questions now, then we may not get the right answer in the long run. And that was the goal. So we sat with the school board on January 13th for, what was it, 12 hours? No, it was like 4 hours. And if it's on YouTube, so if you got 4 hours to spare, sit down and watch that thing. But it was really asking some really difficult questions and challenging out there, you know, how do we break through? How do we break through these areas that have 90% poverty but still need neighborhood schools? How do we break through this idea that we need early intervention into pre-kindergarten education? You know, how do we create a comprehensive high school and balance high school enrollment across the division? How do we do that best? And those are tough questions. And so the board turned around and challenged us to say, okay, then start asking those hard questions and start to shape this to say, how can we benefit all the kids that attend our schools? And so tonight is really about taking that and moving forward with that. And the scenarios that you see aren't final scenarios. There may be some things that you still think need to be in here and want to see happen within a facilities plan and a utilization study. We just had a conversation earlier about, would another program help that happen? And I was like, yeah, that could work because we need to balance some more utilization and get kids to the right buildings and doing all those. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that tonight. And so my goal here is to kind of back up a little bit, show you some of the data that's out there. I want to go through the results from the last meeting. And the reason I want to do that is because it's going to help kind of understand why we came up with some of the scenarios. And then I'm going to present some scenarios to you, and I've got some scenarios up here that I'm going to pass out to you in big sheets so you can go through that. And at the end of the night, I want you to respond to those, and I have a questionnaire that I want you to go through, and I want you to work in small groups too. That way I can spend some time in small groups talking with you, and I've got Matt here, he's our GIS analyst. I've got a lot of division folks here that, raise your hands, I know you want to raise your hands, that have all kinds of expertise and data, but we want to sit down and talk with you tonight about a lot of these things. Ultimately, our goal is to come up with a solution, and it's not the final solution, because divisions go through change and evolution, and cities go through change and evolution. You know, there's no question that there are funding limitations out there, and you know what? That happens. But if funding is the only thing that gets in your way, well, then we got to figure out a way around the funding. But we know that that's in the way, that you don't have all the money in the world to do whatever you want. No school division or district does in the country. So now it comes down to prioritization of what you can accomplish within a capital program, within an academic program, with being able to situate your schools in non-capital solutions and still deliver the best education you can. So with that, the first thing that we wanted to look at was looking at some of the capacity out there. And we can't do these lights any better, can we, in this room? It's all or nothing, isn't it? And, but what we have here is what we wanted to do is that at the beginning of this process, the first thing that we were tasked to do is go through and try to find what really the true capacity of your buildings were. Walking through buildings and trying to figure out really how many kids these buildings could hold. And so we walked room by room and figured out the capacity of buildings. And what it came to some realizations were that, with the decline in enrollment that's occurred in Norfolk Public Schools, is that there's this misnomer that there's all these empty seats sitting out there. But if I look at the elementary grade level and I look division-wide about how many seats are out there versus how many kids are in these buildings, I'm actually about 93% utilized across the division. Now, there's some schools that are about 60 or 50% utilized, but there's also schools out there that are 125, 130% utilized. So way beyond the limitations of their capacity. And so the charge out there saying, okay, can we reduce schools at the elementary grade level becomes a real big challenge because I'm already at above 90%. Now, the challenge again here is how do we balance that better? And one of the scenarios we go through talks about that a little bit. Now, at the middle school, then you have the K-8 schools out there, again, very well utilized. But what we do see some utilization issues are at the middle grades level. Now, you actually don't have a patent on this. Many, many school divisions and districts out there, actually, this is where their big issues are because there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the big reasons is that there's a lot of middle schools out there that used to be high schools. And not necessarily here, not all of them, but across the country, the old high school got turned into the junior high school. And so I just had a big enough building, I just put smaller kids in it. But I still had these massive buildings. The other thing is that that middle grades level for any school district is a time of transition. It's time where you start to see kids go to other choices, like parochial choices or charter choices or whatever, to try to enter into a feeder of a high school that they may want to choose later. Or, and as a former middle grades teacher, part of it is that middle school is just scary. And so I'm going to go find an alternative, whether it's a smaller setting or an alternative setting that's not that public middle school. And so you see this kind of decline that happens and then this resurgence back in high school, and that's exactly what's happened here. But the bottom line is there's too many middle school seats sitting out there. And when I look at the seat delta of that and I see that there's 3,000, think about that, 3,000 empty middle school seats in the division. I think we all can sit here as a taxpayer, as a citizen, to say, I'm really paying for 3,000 empty seats out there to turn the lights on, to cool it, to heat it, to mow the yard, to do that. And if you think about it, that's 2 of your high schools. That's 2 high schools basically sitting empty. That you turn the lights on every day, you operate every day. And so when you start to think about that in that situation, I think, well, how do I solve that and not really impact neighborhood kids, but how do I make a situation better? Because talking about consolidation of buildings isn't about dollar savings. Never has been. People will tell you that all day long. But I'm going to tell you, closing and consolidation of buildings is trying to figure out a better way to instruct children. If you can figure that out, because I will tell you that I think as a taxpayer sitting in my school district, that if I had dollars going to lights and heat versus a child, I choose a child every day. Because that's what I'll do. Now, however, if you walk down the pathway of closing a school but don't offer anything better, then nothing was accomplished. And so we took a hard look at these middle school seats, and you're going to see some questions in the questionnaire that talk about reduction of middle school seats and figuring out how we do that with least impact on kids. And those aren't easy. Last thing I have to say about school closing and consolidations is that, look, school divisions are not in the business of closing schools. It's bad business. That's not why we educate. We don't educate to close buildings. And so when we see any sort of consolidation effort in this, whether it be at the middle school, whether it be at the elementary school, whatever it is, there has to be a solution for the student. And that's our goal. At the high school level, right about that 90%, I will tell you that I think that this number, I've always believed that in between 80 and 90% is a really good utilization for high schools. I believe you start to get above that 90%, high schools become really, really full all of a sudden. And we've got something to talk about with that tonight, which was one of our red flags. But again, one of the points of the conversation tonight on the high schools is about utilization and how the long-term goal for curriculum is to solve what appears on paper to be a utilization issue. And I'll get in more detail on that pretty soon. So along with that capacity and utilization, even though you see the numbers there, what compounds the complexity of this is a density map that shows where students are located. Obviously, the red being the most densely populated. And so when I see these highly densely populated areas, and they're so concentrated in certain spots, sometimes just changing boundaries or building more seats just doesn't work because you're only doing it in a certain measure. You can't spread the density any further. Otherwise, you lose the concept of a neighborhood school. And so trying to figure out then that I'm at 93% utilized at the elementary grade level, but if I start to look about where they're most densely populated, look at all the concentration of elementary schools. And so maybe the school that's in the far northeast of the division has no bearing on the solution because it's too far out there to get boundaries stretched that far. So what are your options then? Well, I start to offer some choice. Well, choice takes away from neighborhood. Well, but it also increases diversity, increases opportunity. So there's always going to be a challenge and a benefit to any decision you make. And so if you start to do the analysis about really what you want, you almost have to put yourself in this whole triangle situation where you can only pick two of the three. Because sometimes you want small schools, but then you want diversity, and then you want neighborhood. Well, folks, that's not the way it works sometimes, because not all neighborhoods are all diverse. And sometimes you have to have bigger schools to get enough resources in the building to make sure every kid gets what they need. And so there's a lot of complexity when it comes to even something as simple as that map. And so, once again, the challenge that's presented in this process is just that. Go ahead. So, the historical and projected enrollment does show that decline, but notice how that decline is actually kind of leveling. That there's not that sharp decline that's happened in the past, but there is still decline that is anticipated to occur. Now, what can impact that decline? Well, you could, obviously that offering attractive schools, attractive programs, places that kids are going to want to be, actually will level that out. We know that will. Offering early intervention to pre-kindergarten, getting kids that have those needs at pre-K 3 and 4 into the system works. And so the key is not to stem enrollment, and not to stem the enrollment decrease at the middle and high school level. That's not the goal. The idea is to stem it when they get here. So how do we get kids in these schools and keep them in schools to feed through success? Not to say that at the middle school and high school level you don't make efforts to keep kids in school, because that's all the concept of trying to get these recovery credit classes, trying to get these courses where kids can have opportunities that aren't making it in the traditional high school setting. I'm not saying give up on those, but if you really, really want to make that impact and stem that, get them in early and keep them here. Offer the programs that are going to keep them attracting through a feeder program. And there's got to be different ways to do that and different solutions. So, from the first community dialogue, the results of this were this. The first questions we asked about was how close kids should be to school. And the numbers are obvious. We want kids closer to buildings. Look at the numbers at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Everything basically is under 30 minutes. But at the elementary grade level, it's even smaller than that. Now that's on traveling by bus. When they're walking, look at that. Under 20 minutes, 89% of people say that every elementary student, 90% of the people say that we need to keep that as close to our kids as we can. And we can all buy into that. I completely think we all buy into that. But, once again, the challenge of this is trying to create some diversity in neighborhoods that aren't diverse and still keep this intact. Which is why we go to that first one and saying about, well, what if we have transportation? Go ahead. The next one is about boundary and transportation. The questions ask, when considering boundary changes, what should we consider? And obviously, the big ones that come up are travel time, neighborhood schools, and diversity and overcrowding, and to balance that overcrowding. All of them got high support when it came to, if you're going to make boundary changes, these are the reasons we should do it. Then it says, what condition would you support altering attendance zones? And again, really high support when it comes to reducing overcrowding, and then also looking at to achieve some diversity. Big support on all of these, because I think everybody comes to the realization at some point the boundaries aren't permanent. We know that. You know, this city's been around a long time. Boundaries only get changed typically because you either built a school or you closed a school. Boundary changes seldom occur comprehensively across the division because it's, well, first of all, it's a painful process. But sometimes when you sit back and you say, okay, what if we just said everything gets picked up? And let's look at this from a fresh start again. Because that's what's needed. Sometimes you have to look at it and say, these boundaries were established 30 years ago. I'm going to have to look at this again. Now, at the elementary grade level, those boundary changes are about a cohort away. 3 or 4 years from now, when everybody's kind of matriculated through the system and you push the kids out that didn't get affected by it, that next cohort, they always knew they were going to that elementary school, so it didn't matter. Now, let's talk about high school boundaries for a second. Now, change a boundary that's been around. Lake Taylor's boundary's been here quite a while. Talk about turf, talk about tradition, talk about feeder, talk about grandma, talk about grandpa. All of those things that went into, this is where I've always gone to school, this is where we'll always go to school. You know, at some point we have to step back and say, wait a minute. It just doesn't fit the model anymore, especially at the secondary grade level. At the secondary grade level where education is becoming more and more about where I can get my best opportunity. Now, not from the parent's perspective. From the parent's perspective, we're pretty stubborn. We like our ways. We like to see that. From the kid's perspective, they're looking at saying, what's my best opportunity? And whatever opportunity means to them. Opportunity can be, what is the best program? Where can I get the best IB program in the division? Opportunity can be, where can I go showcase my sport talent? Where is the best band in the division? There's a whole lot of things that come into when you're talking about high school boundaries. And so the support for that, you know, looking at why we would change boundaries has to be supported by your community if you're going to make those. Then when the division considers and determine the transportation policy, all of these things, again, with the exception of school performance and available funding, you know, we got a lot of support for how we consider transportation needs here. And again, transportation becomes very complicated because you can't make what I call a regressive policy that when you make a choice program that doesn't allow access for all kids. That's a problem. And so if you make a choice to put a program over here in the division and I can't get kids there because my transportation's limited, well then I haven't created opportunity. I've just created a program. And so when we're talking about the transportation and developing the scenarios, those are the things we have to talk about. The pre-K and grade configuration. Look at that, 85% or 96% in there strongly agree about this pre-K intervention. And you know what? You're exactly right. You nailed it. That's what's needed. We identified in here, and it's a little misleading on the questionnaire. We don't mean it to be. But there are 600 that we count unidentified pre-K students out there that need pre-K services that we can't service right now as a division. Imagine that, 600. That's an elementary school. On top of all the students that you're already servicing, and wait a minute, we have to house them somehow, which costs money. Then we have to operate it somehow, which costs money, and that's probably the bigger concern, is that long-term, how do we get it funded? The example I made to the steering committee the other night was, remember in the stimulus package, the Title I dollars that came in for 2 years. Offered a lot of resources, offered a lot of materials, but the funding lasted only a couple of years, and so all the resources that divisions and districts were able to bring in weren't able to sustain, because there wasn't kind of that sustainable funding model because the dollars just weren't there. Was it a good idea? Well, heck yeah, it was a good idea. A lot of kids got a lot of good services for a couple of years and got a lot of good resources. So if a pre-K is a solution, then there has to be both a capital, which is a housing solution, and there's going to have to be a long-term operational solution to it too. So tonight in your questionnaire, you're not going to necessarily see an option for a pre-K center. What you're going to see is opportunities. When opportunities arise, what are our best opportunities for pre-K in the future? What do you believe is preferable grade configuration? Now, this was all across the board, which kind of told us, and when we sat down with our scenarios and our options out there, this told us to explore these grade configurations. Go out there and look at other solutions to how we house children. But again, go back to why we would do that. Balance utilization, balance poverty and socioeconomic, balance race and ethnicity. All of the things that we want to do, but do that through grade configuration instead. This actually gave us some idea about how we could do that. When do you believe it's acceptable for portables to be used? Now, what was interesting is that only 20% said it's never acceptable to use portables, which tells me we've been kind of conditioned to use portables a little bit, haven't we? Which isn't, obviously, we all know that's not our best solution. But in some cases, it has to be our solution. But a temporary building should be just that. A temporary building isn't the permanent solution to housing neighborhood kids for the long term. It's just not. And so we have to figure out a way around that, but when we need them, why can we do that? And then what is the best way to balance the capacity enrollment in schools? You know, consolidate, redraw boundaries, 40%, you never see that. Redraw boundaries, those are typically 10, 15%ers for us. You don't see a lot of large support, but what we do know is about this community is that they see those adjustments that may need to be made in time. And so as you get some new elementary schools, as you get a new Campus Stella P8 out there, as you start to get those buildings, you understand that there has to be some change to that a little bit, and that'll happen. Okay, then, in your opinion, reasonable percentage of seats that could be set aside. Now, at the time we were talking about the transformation charter, but this actually went to a bigger concept of choice. Is that if we have an opportunity to create choice seats within neighborhood schools, how do we still make it a reflective neighborhood school? That the choice isn't taken over the neighborhood seats. That's what this was driving more at. But more importantly is looking at the programs that you think will attract children. STEM actually has a very popular, AVID also does too. IB, I think IB gets a little less support only because I think the IB requirements sometimes are a little vague out there. But I'll tell you, great IB programs are really, really good. But you see across the board once again that there are plenty of opportunities that people see here that are attractive to them. That if I'm going to take away from neighborhood seats, or if I'm going to take my child out of the neighborhood school, it has to be educationally advantageous for me. And that's the key. You know, there's people out there, and it's really funny that you go down and you look at a lot of districts out there, and, you know, the fine arts schools, people will drive their kids 2 hours to get them to a fine arts program because it's the only one in a 5-county region. An attractive program that's better for their child, parents will make that effort. Some way, shape, or form, they'll get them there. No doubt. Because that's what we do as parents. But if the opportunity is not there, if I don't have the means to get to those choice seats, what are the opportunities more available to me closer? Because I shouldn't stand in the way of that either. Again, huge challenge. So, the scenario development really went back to this idea of building planning guidelines on that community input. First one, student proximity to school is important. That was obvious. 2, boundary changes can occur for positive outcomes regarding over and underutilized facilities, trying to balance those better, balance of socioeconomic levels and race and ethnic backgrounds, and boundaries that make sense, both through geography, safe school routes, all of those things that make sense. We can do boundary changes as long as we follow those good guidelines. And they have to make sense. Pre-kindergarten opportunities when made available. And once again, we can talk, and you know, I think one of the most profound things that came out of the State of the Union from President Obama was this initiative towards pre-K. You see it going on in New York City, and if you've been following news coverage in New York City about this pre-K, it's a hot mess right now. Because the mayor is making some controversial decisions about funding cuts here, you know, I've got to expand here, I've got to do that. He's making some hard decisions out there, but the idea coming from the top, and it's coming from the top down, is that we need to get this early intervention. We seldom from government, those government officials at that high level see a funding solution. But the idea is that we need to start the initiative and not let funding get in our way yet. Because if you never have the conversation, when funding does get here someday, you won't have the answer. You won't be ready for it. So that's our goal. Consider the grade configuration changes and keep choice a consideration for all students. Those were messages that were loud and clear after that community dialogue. And I think those are good planning rules. Now, can we do that? We do it through scenario development. So, your capital projects moving forward, just so you know, that the Campus Stella, the STEM Swim Academy, is a new construction. It's going to move forward. Now, we have something on that tonight to talk about, but that's moving forward. We have those projects out there for elementary schools, for Ocean View, Richard Bowling, Larchmont, moving forward. I actually had some discussion with architects already about moving forward on these buildings. Those are great positive things. Comprehensive Career and Technical High School at Lake Taylor, not yet funded, but that's the direction the division's going. But that has an impact, and we're going to take a look at that impact in scenarios. So, I put that in red for a reason, that these are scenarios for consideration only, right now. You may think of more, and that's okay. But the considerations and scenarios you're going to see tonight, which is about 7 or 8 of them, are going to start making that initial step forward in trying to get these planning goals accomplished. Now, there's going to be some that you don't like. If you don't like them, tell us you don't like them. That's why we're here. You know, I'm sure you'll tell me if you don't like them, because that's why you're here. If you like it, but you think it needs some refining, tell me why it needs refined. I think that we talked about a refining of that Lake Taylor still tonight. Still refining, thinking about how we do that better. That's why you're here. After the January 13th meeting, we went back and we developed what I think were 21 different types of scenarios. Kind of internally, we worked through it, trying to figure out, okay, let's throw all the spaghetti on the wall, was our first goal. Let's get all the scenarios out there. By the time we got at the steering committee, we were down to roughly a dozen or so. And then last week, beginning last week, we met the steering committee, and we met 3.5 hours. It was about a 3.5-hour meeting. Pretty intense discussion about what are the right scenarios to bring forward. And so we took some off the table. We put some back on. We even looked at some different scenarios around things that are going to move forward. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the scenarios, and I want to walk through the scenarios because I think it's important to understand why we came to those conclusions about these scenarios. Now, here's what I want you to do is I want you to look at each scenario on its own merit. I don't want you to necessarily compare them against each other because a lot of them are independent of each other. And so look at them and say, okay, is this something that we can look at and seriously consider? So the first one is an elementary boundary changes to balance utilization and or socioeconomic status. Now, what this chart shows you is that, and what we did was we kind of lifted up the boundaries and kind of ran some mock boundaries, not set boundaries, but redistribution of students based on, some natural boundaries out there that we could do. And so you're going to see numbers on here that, first of all, the current utilization, and then it says new boundary enrollment, but there's not typically, we technically haven't redrawn the boundary. So I don't know if it's Main Street to Elm Street or something like that. What the GIS did was kind of just look at a redistribution of students, is what it did. And so what this scenario does is it balances utilization, and it's intended to align neighborhoods to schools. Students may live closer to schools in this scenario. In most cases, they would. And it may lead to cleaner fader patterns in time. Now, this is what we know about boundary changes. You can do boundary changes and, you can do feeder changes and never affect a boundary. For instance, I can take a whole elementary and change its feeder pattern and never change its boundary, but I can't necessarily do that with boundaries. I may change a boundary, and all of a sudden you moved it into the middle school boundary, which has a different high school feeder. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have to be very careful about that because I personally believe, in 15 years of doing this planning, that high school boundaries are determined by elementary boundaries. I think that by the time in elementary school, you pretty much know where you're going to high school. I think most kids do that. And so we have to be very careful when we're talking about boundary changes about that feeder impact. Now, here's the challenge of this, is that not all schools get impacted by this, but most schools have to come to the altar on this one. They're going to have to, everybody feels a little bit of this. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't really balance the socioeconomic like we wanted to. Because, again, the idea of stretching so far away from the lower SES becomes too difficult. Now, did we balance utilization better? Yeah, I think so. We got some of those yellows, or we got some of those blues up into the greens. We reduced a lot of the reds, even though there's still a lot of red there. You see some declining of that, but not all of them. And so the scenario analysis here was an idea of bringing a scenario to say, we can make an attempt at this, but how far should we go? The second scenario, and it's just on the back of this page, and so you see here, is now one of the reasons that we had, we started talking about Camp Estella and south of the river and talking about the really awesome opportunity that this new school provides. And I was very, very clear to the board that this is the right, such a good initiative. That everything is right about it, but what starts to happen here is that when you start to look at all of the kids that live in, because you just can't take Camp Estella into consideration, you have to take the whole area, and so St. Helena starts to play a little role in this. Now, the reason this started to raise a red flag was because of the number of students that actually live south of the river and how many seats are actually there for neighborhood kids. And when you started to break this out and you started to say, well, if Camp Estella is going to have choice, how many seats can really be offered for choice without displacing neighborhood kids? That was for me, it was a red flag. And again, the reason for that is that, people live in a boundary, they expect a neighborhood school, and if they go to a school that doesn't have a seat because kids are coming in from other parts of the city that take away their seat, what does that mean? Now, the other problem with that is that is that then we limit ourselves to diversity on a lot of different levels. Because if I'm not offering choice, how do I attract students from all over the division? So it's and again, some of the, and you go way back into the early parts of this discussion, is that on one side, the argument is our kids in our neighborhood should have that choice. If they want to go to another school, they should have that choice to do that. That not every kid's going to want to stay here. On the other side of the argument is that I want to have a seat for my neighborhood child, and that makes sense too. And so that's why this started to be part of the discussion here. Now, in this scenario here, on scenario 2, it still offers this idea. And again, the offering doesn't change when it comes to the purpose of this building. The idea is that it's a K-8 STEM swim school. The problem here is that it limits the number of choice seats. If you look at the number of elementary kids and the number of middle school kids that live in the Compostela area, it only leaves about 50 non-neighborhood seats at the elementary grade level, which is less than 10 per grade level. But on the flip side, it offers like 130 middle school seats at the middle school level because we don't have that many middle school kids that stay in that live in that area. Now think about that. How do you want to run a program of STEM? Do you want to run it continuous, that kids are introduced early age and have a continuity of program? Or do we interject kids at that middle grades level when they don't have the baseline of the STEM education in K-5? You see the dilemma there? And so the big dilemma is that, great, there's 130 seats here at the middle grades level, but if the entry point disrupts the process of the STEM and Swim Academy, and they don't have the foundation, then is that really going to lead to the success we want? And so it offers actually an academic challenge for us. Once again, I continue to stress just about how good an idea this is. This school and this program offering. And again, and if you didn't hear me say it before, here's the great thing. Because people worry about these trends in education. What if STEM isn't the future? Well, the great news is you're going to have a building that has a bunch of great lab space, like great technology, great flexibility for whatever program in 2050 comes to bear. You're going to have one of the most flexible buildings you've ever built. So that's awesome. So we continue that. So the discussion then went to, okay, but if I start to talk about the entire area south of the river and I talk about how many seats I have there, St. Helena raises an issue. And the reason for that is St. Helena is a very small building. It's not a building in great condition. It's a great school. Now, the problem is the building only has a capacity, it has a capacity of less than 300. Now, school buildings that have less than 300 kids offer two challenges. They offer academic challenges because you can't get all the resources, you can't fund all the resources because there's not enough dollars funded with that few amount of kids. The other thing is that then you have a financial issue. Is that what I'm doing is I'm trying to take money to get all the resources, so I'm kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul when I'm trying to resource and staff that building to have the same opportunities that a school of 400 or 500 have. So that's a challenge when you have schools that are under 300, no doubt about it. Now, on top of that, the building can't grow. There's nowhere on the site to grow it, and the building is going to need repairs. No way around that. Now, if I look at the entire St. Helena Compostela area, I simply don't have enough seats for all those kids. There just isn't. Now, there's also, because of the projects moving forward, there's no funding to build another elementary school yet. And so one of the reasons that another option came up, which is the Compostela 2B option, is to combine into a K-1 opportunity at St. Helena, and then Compostela being the 2-8 natural feeder, trying to offer a neighborhood continuity solution. and doing it through grade configuration. Now, you'll notice on St. Helena that even though the utilization doesn't go down that much, working at the K1 level, you will have some more flexibility within those spaces for the smaller kids. Offers an opportunity, when we talked about grade configuration, I think Dr. King says this the best of anybody, is that the focus is on reading, 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 getting kids to learn to read, and then when they get beyond that, then they can read what they want. I don't even say it close to as good as Dr. King does, but that's the premise of getting that baseline foundation. And also helps us a little bit on a utilization, and also has a continuity of neighborhood between the schools. Now, do we believe that more seats will be needed in time in this area? I think we do. We also believe that there's a concentration of pre-K students that aren't being serviced in the area because we don't have, even though we do have the Campus Stella property for pre-K, we still see more need for space in that area. But we don't have any space. And so the reason we came up, that the steering committee started talking about this grade configuration change down here, was to try to look at that a little better. Again, what it doesn't do, and I want to make this very clear, it doesn't take the idea that the Campus Stella will start with that STEM, STEAM, and swim, that STEM program and that swim program. That's intact, regardless of the grade configuration. And I want to make that really clear out there. Okay, so scenario 3 then is looking at the new buildings. Larchmont, Ocean View, and Richard Bowling. Now, what was key on this one was that because we're going to build these buildings at the 700 capacity, we have some opportunity here to open up some seats for choice. That allows students to increase some diversity, both in all levels that we want to increase diversity, but offering some choice school-within-school programs that allow students to come from other boundaries if they want to help us balance that, all those things that we want to balance, including the utilization. And so what I believe is one of our strongest scenarios out there: new buildings, school choice, diversity. We get by doing these 3 schools. Now, scenario 4 really then challenges this whole grade configuration. One of the challenges that came through was, what if we were to build a process that had schools that were early learning and then that intermediate grade level? So pre-K, K1 schools, much like we talked about at Campus Stella. But what if we had an opportunity to create kind of a one-boundary solution with 2 schools that was a primary learning center, learn to read, our foundations reading, foundation reading. All the research goes to that. By 3rd grade, you better have comprehension skills in reading. Because if you don't, your chances of graduation and having a high school graduation decrease 75%. Those are the numbers. We got to get our kids comprehensively understanding reading by 3rd grade. That's scary if you think about it. And so the idea here was that we focused these early learning, so Willoughby as a PK1 and Ocean View as a 2-5. And you can see what it does to the utilization a little bit. It gets Willoughby up, and it actually does a little bit to, probably a little more than we want to at Ocean View because of the new capacity. But keep in mind, if we had choice programs, that this might offer more choice for kids and more diversity. The second one is Jaycox is a K2 and Lindenwood is a 3-5. And again, you see that utilization. Now, Lindenwood offers a challenge here. And so we'd have to look at that a little more. And then PB Young and Tidewater, again, trying to balance out a little bit. Even though you don't do it quite at PB Young, you actually get that Tidewater down a little bit so it balances the 2. Again, so we looked at some things for diversity, we looked at things for academic success, and we looked at things for balancing of utilization here through grade configuration change. On scenario 5, where, now, this is something that was discussed that if you're looking at both of these options, you can't really take the Ocean View Willoughby in the last scenario with this one. But what this did was said, since we're building a new Ocean View school, can we just make one boundary with the Willoughby school, put all the kids in the new elementary school, and then repurpose Willoughby for another purpose? And that can be, it could be a pre-K center, it could be a professional development center, it could be something, but an educational presence still. But here was a challenge here is that if you look at the current enrollment at the buildings, they don't quite fit. But if you look at the live-in of Willoughby and Ocean View, all the kids would fit in this building. And you have an opportunity to reduce one building as a K-5, but have a real need and purpose. It's already being developed as an early learning school anyway. Is that right? Okay, so that's, make sure I got that right, but it's already being developed as that anyway. So this gives us an opportunity to, again, educationally, if you're going to consolidate a school, what's my opportunity? I get the best state-of-the-art building. I'm not going very far from my current building at all. And I have more enrichment opportunities here for the neighborhood. And so even though this shows a consolidation, now, again, this is something that you have to work through. So all those people out there in TV land, this scenario doesn't say we're closing Willoughby tomorrow. So let's not get panicked about that. Okay, it's a transition plan to make sure every student has a good transition plan into a brand new facility. So that's why this scenario is developed like that. Now, scenario 6 really starts to get at the heart of the kind of the middle school capacity. One of the questions asked of the school board was that why not take a middle school and make it either an elementary school and push kids up and relieve some of that, or make it a K-8 school or make it something different. Now, Lafayette Winona offers an opportunity, first of all, to reduce middle school seats dramatically, but offer a program, a choice school instead of a neighborhood school. That, and we have on here STEM, but there's all kinds of ideas that can be floated out there. But make it a 3-8 school, so if you went to that idea of these K-1 schools or pre-K-1, you may have a natural feeder into a 3-8 program too. It reduces some of your middle school seats, but keeps a neighborhood presence of education there, which was key. Now, you also have a question that precedes scenario 6 that says doing one of these buildings may not be enough. And so there's a question on there that asks you, would you be in favor of using a middle school building for something like a governor's school in the division? Would you be in favor of using a middle school as an elementary school in time, or kind of as a temporary solution for space needs? To be able to do something like that. And it doesn't identify a specific school because we purposely said that. Because we're not looking at a specific school other than this Lafayette Winona as a repurposed building for a division-wide choice building. The final scenario actually goes to the scenario that has been decided that Lake Taylor High School will become a comprehensive high school with career and technical education. Now, when we went back, and the reason this raised a red flag on our side was that when you take one high school boundary off the table, because all of a sudden what you've done, and we got to follow this closely because sometimes I don't make this very clear. But once you make a high school a division-wide choice, its boundary disappears. That make sense? Because it's everybody's boundary then. So then what happens is that my remaining 4 high schools have to have a boundary. That captures the Lake Taylor boundary. Now, this is more for education than anything because on paper, what it looks like is that we're completely overtaxing the existing high schools. So if you look down here and you see that the new utilization for Booker T is 109, Granby goes up even, Maury goes to 108, and Norview goes to 108. Now when you're looking at that and you're at those high schools, I know I have a parent over here that saw those numbers and saying, wait a minute, you're going to make my high school 110% utilized? Now, here's the thing, is that remember that Lake Taylor's still going to have 1,500 seats at it. That is intended to attract out of each of those schools to get those utilizations back down. Now, the goal then is to make sure that I'm doing the right programs, the right target approaches, the right marketing approaches, that I can get the kids that from Granby want to come out, that from Maury want to come out, from Booker T that want to come out, from Norview that want to come out. That way I can get those utilizations to the right numbers. And that's an academic and operational solution. But without showing this up front, because again, trying to be as transparent as we can be in this process, if we came out with a recommendation that showed Maury at 110% utilization, people would freak out. And you know what? They're going to freak out because there's not a whole lot of people from Maury here tonight. But when they see the solution that says, I still have the seats here that are going to be in the most technology-rich, the most advanced programs that we can offer to get kids moving forward in both college and career readiness, because that's what this building is going to be about. But we were actually going to take the scenario off because we're going to move forward on, even though funding's not there yet, we're going to move forward on making this campus the career and technical, but we felt it was best to leave it on here because we wanted to show those numbers and we wanted to make people understand that the intent is not to overcrowd the schools. The intent is, though, that every school has to have a boundary. Maybe. Heck, maybe in time all the boundaries just kind of go away. And maybe that's a 20, 25-year solution. But right now, we have to show it so kids see a natural feeder pattern. They see that alignment, that vertical alignment of where they're going to attend school. And on the reverse side, the accountability is important. If we have good, clean feeder patterns, when that kid graduates, and if they go to college or they go out in their career and we find out that our school didn't meet their needs, we can track back in a linear pattern to say, well, this was the feeder pattern of that child. Where did we fail here? And we can track that better. And so that's the intent of having a good, clean feeder system on there. So with that, those are the scenarios presented in front of you. Now you have a questionnaire, and I'm going to tell you why these say draft on them, and we apologize for that, is that Matt's suitcase is still somewhere between Charlotte and Norfolk, under the snow of Charlotte, that had all the questionnaires printed on our side. And so Elizabeth, where's Elizabeth, spent the afternoon running as many of these questionnaires as we could, so we had questionnaires for tonight. Thank you, Elizabeth, for doing that. But that's why this still has draft on it. But these are the questions that were on the questionnaire there. Okay? So first things first, go to in the questionnaires. What we want you to do is we want you to walk through the questionnaire as an individual. Now, most importantly, if you don't want to answer the questionnaire tonight, don't answer it tonight. We're not here to pressure you into making a decision because you just saw a bunch of data and some weird consultant up there that fed you a bunch of data in about an hour. That's not our goal. This is going to be offered online. As soon as the video is done and edited and they get the PowerPoint online, it's already, the division already has the link to it. As soon as that's ready tomorrow, it's going to go up live on the on the division website. So if you don't want to answer this tonight, don't answer it tonight. If you do, that's fine. But here's what I do want you to do. I want you to stay here, and I want you to go through the group questionnaire. I want you to have a discussion on each one. And try to answer the group questionnaire as a table together. And try to give us some response as a group. And if you don't want to answer this tonight, don't. And so, but with that, at the end of the night, what I want you to do is I want one person at the table to collect anything that was filled out so we can have that to take back. The goal is to have these results turned around by next week. So you know that the website, because we have to, the board is on a timeline for budget and getting everything together. That comes March, you have a March 5th, right? For budget, kind of getting ready for that. Our deliverable is around that time to make sure they have the parameters to move forward from the capital planning side. So the website's going to go down Sunday at midnight. Okay, so we have it open for about 5 days. Because we don't have a lot of people here, go home and tell your neighbors, tell your friends. Go to your schools, tell people to get online. They can answer questions and they can type to their heart's desire. Okay, and it just drops right in for us. We're trying to get as much participation out there as we can. Okay? Even though we may not get a lot of people here, we want to get it through the web if we can. So go home and tell everybody. So the first goal tonight is go through that individual questionnaire if you want, get that answered, but importantly, to go through the group questionnaire, build consensus that best fits your table. So if you see scenario 1, talk to your table and say, hey, do you strongly support it? Do you strongly not support it? Or are you somewhere in between? On a consensus thing, I usually typically say that if you're between a strongly and a support, if you're willing to stand on the table and fight for what that is, then you're probably, then hold your ground. If not, come to some consensus about where the table is on each scenario. Look at them independently, okay? And then record. Now, we're supposed to have wall charts. We don't have those tonight because of that. But, and you're supposed to have an envelope in your table, which we don't have either, and I apologize for that. So just make sure somebody at the table has those. And at the end of the night, either hand them to Matt or myself. Now, with that, I'm going to let you start. And if you have questions, Matt and I have all this data in our head. Steering committee members are here to help too. And I'd like to just come and sit with your tables for a while, if that's okay. When you're done, feel free to go. Go back to your lives, and there's not going to be a closing or wrapping up. I know that on behalf of the board, Dr. King, and all the staff, the appreciation of you being here is, you almost can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And so I want to pass that along from them and certainly from us, because your input's important to help us shape this plan. So with that, I'm going to let you go.